I'm a 32-year-old man living alone in a rented apartment in the northern part of my city. This happened last winter during one of those weeks when the rain wouldn't stop and the sky seemed to forget it was supposed to brighten in the morning. I'd just been fired, not for poor performance, but because of that infamous restructuring, the corporate euphemism that really means you don't matter anymore. I spent days not getting out of bed, eating whatever was left in the fridge, and replying to messages only when absolutely necessary. My routine was wake up late, drink cold coffee, stare vaguely at the wall, and wait for night to fall. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was more like I'd been erased, as if I didn't matter. Yet I was still here, moving only by inertia. But enough with the self-pity. Today, I'm employed again, and I've even started running. Still, every now and then, I remember that night, and I wonder if it all really happened, or if my brain, in that state, invented something to force me to react. It was a Tuesday, around 10 p.m. I was sitting in the living room armchair, a thin blanket draped over my shoulders, watching a documentary about wild animals. Not out of interest, but because I like watching Mother Nature at work. The apartment was small, living room, open kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom. So I could hear every sound in the building with absurd clarity. The neighbor upstairs dragging a chair, the elevator's hum, the bathroom pipe dripping, which I'd never fixed. At some point, I noticed something odd in the documentary's audio. A low, repetitive noise, like someone lightly tapping their knuckles on a wooden surface. Regular intervals, almost rhythmic. I ignored it at first, assuming it was part of the ambient soundtrack. But the more I listened, the more it felt out of place. The documentary showed abyssal creatures, total silence in the depths of the forest. There was no reason for that sound. Still, I let it keep playing, maybe out of morbid curiosity. Maybe because in that state of apathy, any anomaly felt like an invitation to feel something. 15 minutes later, I got up to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. I paused the video, something rare, since I hardly ever paid real attention. When I came back and sat down, remote in hand, about to press play, I heard the sound again. Except the video was still paused, the screen frozen on a translucent creature with enormous eyes. I froze. I looked around. The apartment was silent. No windows open, nothing moving. I waited, counted to 30, and there it came again. Exactly the same rhythm, the same tone. My heart raced. I slowly stood up, making no noise, and began searching the apartment. I opened cabinets, checked behind the bathroom curtain, inspected the balcony. Nothing. Everything was exactly where it should be. But when I returned to the living room, I heard the sound once more, this time clearly coming from outside my door. My blood ran cold. I lived on the 4th floor. There was no external balcony, no easy outside access. Who could be knocking on my door without ringing the doorbell? I walked to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then a whisper, almost inaudible, as if someone were speaking softly, repeating the same word. I couldn't make out what it was. I stepped back, grabbed my phone, and called the building superintendent. He said no one was in the hallway, that the building was empty at that hour. He suggested I might be hearing the plumbing, but I knew it wasn't that. I went back to the armchair, determined to ignore it. I turned the documentary back on, as if resuming normalcy would erase what had happened. 2 minutes later, the sound returned. But now, it was coming from inside the bedroom. I jumped to my feet. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, as always, but I was certain I hadn't gone in there since that morning. I walked to the door and slowly pushed it open, and I saw. My backpack, which I had left tossed on the floor, was open, and next to it lay a notebook I didn't recognize. It was small, black, with a red ribbon marking a page. I didn't remember buying it or ever seeing it before. With trembling hands, I picked up the notebook. I opened it to the marked page. There was a single sentence written in careful handwriting, as if the writer wanted to be understood. "You're not alone. They've been watching you for days." I instinctively looked up toward the ceiling, as if there were a hidden camera. That's when I noticed. The bedroom window, which I was certain I had closed before going to sleep the night before, was slightly open, just about 5 centimeters, enough for someone to slip a hand through and leave the notebook there. I rushed to close it, locking it with the latch I never used. But when I turned around, I saw something in the wardrobe mirror, a shadow, for just an instant, passing behind me in the apartment hallway. Except I was alone. I knew I was. I called the police. While I waited, I crouched behind the sofa, gripping a kitchen knife, listening to every creak in the building as if it were an approaching footstep. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They searched the apartment, checked the hallway, spoke with the doorman. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no record of visitors. The notebook? Gone. I'd left it on the kitchen table for just a second to answer the door, and when I came back, it was no longer there. The officers said it was probably a mistake, or maybe a homeless person trying to get attention. But one of them, an older officer, looked me in the eyes and quietly said, "If it happens again, don't open the door, no matter what they say." I never found out who left that notebook. I never knew if the shadow was real. But since that night, I lock all my windows. And sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I hear that sound again, as if someone were reminding me, "You're not alone."
It's 2024 as I write this. My internship contract ends in just a few days. Let me make an observation, frustrating but honest. I've never understood how my coworkers can spend entire weeks in noisy co-working spaces or crowded cafes, pretending they're being productive. Frankly, I can't stand it. That's why, since the beginning of my internship, I've used any long break as an excuse to return to my grandmother's house in the countryside. There, time seems to move slower, and silence feels almost sacred. This last break was no different. I was going to spend 5 days away from relentless emails and pointless meetings. In fact, I was even a bit relieved because I'd spent the previous night revising a report my boss had sent back with vague comments like, "lacks depth," without pointing to a single concrete or obvious error. It was humiliating. But anyway, it was a Tuesday morning. No obligations. All I needed was to go for a walk, and that was it. I've always been the kind of person who needs movement early in the morning. It's the only routine that makes me feel like I still have some control over my time. So even though I was at my grandmother's with nothing to do, I set my alarm for 6:15 a.m. and forced myself to get up. I figured that if I left before 7 a.m., I'd avoid even the few neighbors who usually walk their dogs. By 6:40, I was already in sneakers and a sweatshirt, slipping out the back door. The path to the creek trail takes about 20 minutes, mostly along dirt roads, surrounded by empty fields and rusted fences. Nothing remarkable ever happens out there. It was, without a doubt, a peaceful place to grow old, but it had grown a bit lonely after my grandmother lost her mobility and the closest neighbors moved away. I was walking, listening to an old podcast through my headphones, when something made me stop. There was a hot dog truck parked at the entrance of the old abandoned orchard. Engine off, no visible license plate. That wouldn't have drawn attention during harvest season, but it was April, and the orchard had been closed for years. Besides, it was far too early even for curious tourists. There was no reason for a vehicle to be there at 7 a.m. It felt completely out of place. As I passed by, I slowed down just enough to glance through the windows. They were covered with dark-tinted film. After turning the corner and leaving it behind, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about it more than usual. I don't know why. The whole scene just felt wrong. It wasn't just that the truck was in a forgotten spot. It was that I'd never seen a single car parked there, not even when I visited my grandmother as a child. That stretch of road simply didn't get visitors. As strange as it was, I eventually ignored it and kept walking. After half an hour, I turned back, feeling like I'd regained a bit of peace. But when I passed the orchard entrance again, the truck was still there, exactly in the same spot. That made me stop once more. I figured someone would have noticed by now. This was precisely the kind of place where everyone knows each other's cars, and a stranger parked for hours would raise suspicion. In fact, I remember once when a delivery guy was questioned for half an hour just because he stopped to pee behind a tree. I mention this only to say I'm not imagining things. Anyone would have found that truck suspicious by now. Curiosity took over. Instead of heading straight home, I took a longer route just to pass by the vehicle again, this time to see if anyone was inside. And there was. On my second pass, I must have walked too slowly because the man in the passenger seat turned and stared at me for about 3 seconds. He had a blank, almost inhuman expression. His hair was plastered to his forehead as if he'd slept in the car, and his eyes were so pale they seemed to glow in the dim morning light. He looked like someone who didn't belong anywhere, and that deeply unsettled me. After that, I went straight home. My grandmother was asleep, so I was alone. I spent the morning trying to read, but I couldn't focus. Around noon, I went out to get bread from the corner bakery. As I crossed the street in front of the house, I nearly tripped from shock. It was the same truck, parked across the street, 2 houses down. It wasn't facing my direction, but I was absolutely certain it wasn't a coincidence. I stood there for a moment, heart racing. Had that guy followed me into the village? I knew he had. There was no other explanation. I quickly grabbed the bread and hurried back, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. As soon as I got inside, I went up to the attic bedroom. There's a small gap in the blinds that faces the main road. I gently pulled them open and peeked out. Sure enough, the truck was still there. I watched for a few minutes, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but I couldn't look away. Eventually, I had to stop. I tried to cook something, but every sound made me glance out the window. Every 20 minutes, I returned to the attic. Each time I looked, the truck was in a different spot, which meant the driver was deliberately moving around the village. I didn't know whether to call the police or not. After all, nothing illegal had actually occurred. Even now, I regret not doing what any sensible person would have, either report it or simply leave. But I became obsessed. My grandmother collects old maps, so I remembered she had a field binoculars from my grandfather. I went to her closet, found it, and returned to the attic. I peered through the gap with the binoculars. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Through the truck's side window, the same man was watching me through another pair of binoculars. The moment he realized I'd caught him, he ducked down, started the engine, and sped away. I stood frozen. That guy had followed me all the way to my grandmother's house and spent hours watching the street. That's when I called the local police station. I explained that a suspicious truck had been circling the village all day, that a man inside had been spying on me with binoculars, and that he'd fled as soon as he was spotted. The officer was polite. He said they'd send someone to check, but added that hot dog trucks are too common to track. He hung up shortly after. When my grandmother woke up, I told her everything. She was frightened, but said it was probably just someone who got lost. Exhausted, I went to bed early. Later, I woke up suddenly. It was 2:47 a.m. I sat up in bed, trying to figure out what had woken me, when I heard it. A metallic sound, low, repetitive, almost like a rusted bell swaying in the wind. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it was coming from outside and getting closer. Before I could react, something gently scraped against the bedroom wall. I understood immediately. Someone was throwing pebbles at the house. I froze, cold sweat breaking out. I kept telling myself I should look, but my legs wouldn't move. Finally, I dragged myself to the window. On the count of 3, I yanked the curtain open. The man was standing in the front yard, beneath the fig tree, and beside him were 2 small suitcases, or at least they looked like suitcases from their shape. It was too dark to see clearly. I didn't waste time. I ran to wake my grandmother and called the police again. My uncle, who lives nearby, arrived before the patrol car, but the man was already gone. The police came, took notes, but didn't do much else. I returned to the city 2 days later. My grandmother promised to call if anything strange happened. That was a month ago. She hasn't reported anything. But the reason I'm writing this now is because
I got a message from a cousin yesterday. 2 teenagers went missing from a neighboring town. Siblings, both under 16, taken from their home in the middle of the night. The moment I read that, my mind went straight back to that night, to those 2 shapes beside the man in the garden. The truth makes me sick to my stomach. Why would he spend hours watching me and then risk coming back at night? And if he were involved in a kidnapping, why expose himself so recklessly? Maybe he thought I'd seen something in the van.
But if he really had taken those kids, wouldn't silence be exactly what he needed most? And those suitcases, were they theirs or just a disguise? I can't stop imagining it. The only explanation is that people who commit crimes like this don't think like the rest of us. And maybe that's why he took the risk, just to scare me. My grandmother has already contacted the police to report what we saw. If there are any updates, I'll post them here.
This happened last fall, about 8 months ago. I'm an elevator maintenance technician, so my days are filled with urgent service calls. When I'm not in buildings fixing those issues, I'm replying to frantic messages from building managers, even though it's not technically my job, but, fine. Because of this, I have to check my phone every half hour, even on weekends. It sounds exhausting, but what can I do? It's part of the job. Since I handle emergencies, I can't ignore unknown numbers. It could be a stuck elevator with someone inside. That's why I get suspicious calls almost every day, but I answer them all, just in case. One night, after midnight, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was an unsaved number. Normally, I'd answer without hesitation, but at that moment, I was already half asleep, exhausted after spending the day fixing an elevator stuck on the 17th floor. Something about the hour made me let the phone ring until it stopped. No message was left. I thought, if it were urgent, they'd have called back or insisted. But 5 minutes later, the same number appeared on the screen. I sat up in bed and answered. I was irritated, but kept my voice professional. It could be a trapped resident. At first, I only heard a low noise, like an electric motor slowly powering down. I was about to hang up when I noticed something beneath that sound. A voice. I brought the phone closer to my ear. Was that my voice? I thought for a second. There was no doubt. I froze for a few seconds, ice running through my veins. After a moment, I recognized it. It was a snippet of a conversation I'd had that afternoon with the superintendent of a commercial building. We'd been discussing the main elevator's failure history, technical details, nothing sensitive, but it was unmistakably me speaking. I don't know if it was the right thing to do, but I hung up immediately. I sat in the dark, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't scared, just deeply unsettled. The best way to describe it is like my privacy had been violated without me even noticing. My first guess was that the superintendent had accidentally called while listening to a recording of our conversation, maybe to share it with engineers. It sounded plausible, even if unlikely. It didn't explain the different number, but it was better than imagining worse possibilities. The next morning, I called back to confirm. He answered quickly and seemed calm, but when I mentioned the late-night call, he was confused. He said he didn't even know it was possible to record calls from the building's landline. He sounded sincere. I apologized and hung up, and for some reason, I believed him. The rest of the day was normal. Maintenance jobs, reports, bad coffee. I almost forgot about the incident until that night. Around the same time, the phone rang again. A new number, also unknown. This time, I answered immediately. It was another recording, light static but audible, of a conversation I'd had that day with a building manager. We'd been discussing repair timelines and spare parts. I hung up without saying a word. That's when I realized this wasn't a coincidence, and I noticed a disturbing detail. Only my voice was on the recording. It was as if someone had isolated my audio, erasing the other person entirely. I started wondering if someone was intercepting my calls, maybe a competitor, a resentful former employee. I didn't sleep well. My mind wouldn't stop spinning scenarios. I never thought of myself as paranoid, but the next week proved otherwise. Every night, I received a call from a random number, always with a recording of something I had said that day. I started recording the calls myself. I don't know why, I just felt I needed proof. By the fourth night, it began consuming me. It wasn't just weird anymore. It was oppressive. I couldn't focus. I caught myself peering through curtain gaps. I locked my apartment door with an extra deadbolt. I left the lights on in every room. I propped a ladder against my bedroom door as a barrier. It sounds absurd now, but in that moment, it made sense. My mind was in survival mode. I even started taking calls in the building hallway where I had a clear view of the elevators and the exit. I went to the police station. I felt ridiculous, but I couldn't take it anymore. The officer took notes, but his look said he thought it was nonsense. He said that without an explicit threat, they couldn't act. I don't know if they investigated the numbers. Probably not. A few days later, the calls stopped. Suddenly, as if whoever was behind it had gotten what they wanted. But the silence was worse. It made me imagine they were just watching, waiting. My father had paranoid episodes before being diagnosed with delusional disorder. I've always feared inheriting something like that. In those days, I felt I was on the edge of something similar. I changed my number. It was a mess. I lost contacts, had to reconfigure everything, risked missing service calls, but I didn't care. I needed a fresh start. After a week of calm, the worst thing happened. One night, after dinner, the phone rang. Same pattern. New number, recording of my voice, this time from a call I'd made that morning. This time, I didn't hang up. I spoke, my voice trembling. If you want something, just say it. I'm willing to fix this. Just leave me alone. I gave my address, said I'd wait. And for the first time, there was a response. A distorted, metallic voice, like it was coming through an old speaker. It said only 0032, then hung up. I know what you're thinking. Why give out your address like that? I have no answer. I was beyond logic. My mind wasn't mine anymore. The next 3 days were the darkest of my life. I have a pocket knife my grandfather gave me. I took it, sharpened the blade, and sat in the living room staring at the door. I can't describe the thoughts I had there. I imagined everything. Break-in, confrontation, escape. I honestly believe that if someone had shown up, I would have done something irreversible. Just remembering it sends a chill down my spine. 0032 came and passed. No one came. I slept in the armchair, knife in hand. It was the longest night of my life. After that, there were no more calls. But the damage was already done. It took me months of therapy. I took time off work. Even today, I have anxiety attacks at the sound of a landline phone ringing. I never found out who it was, how they recorded my calls, or why they chose me. Maybe it was just a cruel experiment. Maybe someone testing boundaries. I moved neighborhoods, switched carriers, erased all my old data. But there's no way to undo what it did to me. If this experience taught me anything, it's that sanity is fragile, and sometimes the greatest danger isn't out there. It's in how our minds respond to what we can't understand. I hope writing this helps me move forward.